I'll start by seniority. I would like to introduce Mr. Mick Guzauski from Los Angeles. Everybody, welcome.
Are you older than me?
For anybody who doesn't know him,
How old are you?
I don't know.
he's a mixing legend.
59.
He's been
67.
in the business
Yeah.
since the early 1970s. He's from New York originally. He's kind of flipping between New York and LA in his life. We'll see how long he stays in LA this time.
Well, if Trump gets back in, probably only till next November.
We might have him back next year for good. Okay, that's good. He's responsible for a sizable part of the pop music world of my age. I really have to say that. Pretty much lots of the R&B, the mainstream pop of the 90s, Mariah Carey, Earth, Wind and Fire, many people that I don't have the time to list here. He has 17 Grammys to his name.
1-5.
1-5?
Yeah, 50.
Wow.
I make it 1-7, it sounds much better. No, 15 Grammys, wonderful, which is 15 more than I have. And you are, even though you started as an all-round engineer, you're mostly a mixing engineer right now at this point, right?
Yeah, I mean, it didn't happen deliberately, but it just seemed like the business shifted in the late 80s.
Right.
And I just started getting calls for more, for mixing more. And it's, and then the amount of live tracking really decreased. The amount of having real bands in the studio for making records decreased. So I got more calls for mixing as people made more records at home or more records that are synthesized and sequenced.
Do you produce as well, Mick?
No.
You don't?
I mean, I have co-produced a couple things, but I like the path of least resistance, where I just get the...
Lucky man. Lucky man.
I think that's one thing I can say in advance, is you sleep substantially better when you're an engineer and not a producer, because you're fulfilling the will of the artist and the producer rather than having to be responsible for the idea itself, which makes for pretty heavy sleep as far as in disturbed sleep, as far as I know. I'm moving on to Mr. Peter Walsh, who is a producer and engineer.
I'm a producer, yeah. Still.
Yes. How would you weigh your producer engineering world?
Well, I do both at the same time. So.
Okay, but you don't do any engineering exclusive gigs
Yeah,
anymore?
but I do a little bit of mixing for where there's not a production role included, but it usually turns into making production decisions. So, but it's kind of I came into the business through the engineering recording side, rather than the. I'm not a musician or anything, so the two kind of work together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Peter is a producer and engineer who started in the late 70s as a staff engineer at Utopia Studios in London. Where was that about?
That's right. Yeah. Sorry.
Where was Utopia?
Utopia was in North London. Yeah.
Okay.
Camden Town. Yeah.
And he has left his mark on the pop music, rock music world with, I hope I don't treat you wrongly with it, but in the independent world,
Yeah.
more or less. There are times in the pop world where pop, as in everybody listens to it, and independent, fewer people but more interesting music, maybe you could say that, converge more, and the early 80s was one of those times, and Peter was very active in that area with Peter Gabriel, Heaven 17, which is, you probably don't know them, but for me that's a game changer, because I was 13 at the time or something. Also with Pulp, The Church, and since this is really relevant to today's topic, divas of all kinds, for example, Ute Lemper comes to mind.
Oh, I worked on her.
Yeah.
So, and people like Scott Walker, people who don't know him, huge influence on people like Radiohead and others.
David
Amazing,
Bowie,
amazing operatic rocker, if you would put it. Maybe that's a good way to put it. I'm not sure. We can talk about that later with lots of beer.
Yeah.
So, the youngest in the round, Monsieur Philipp Weiss, is that the way to pronounce it, or is it Weiss?
Yes, no, Weiss.
Weiss. You're a mixer exclusively, is that right,
Yes,
Philipp?
correct.
Have you ever produced or
Never produced. Recorded, I should say, a little bit, but mostly mixing.
Philipp started as well as a mixer or as an assistant in a studio in Paris called Davout.
Yes, correct.
Did you start as an entry-level assistant, or did you?
Absolutely, entry-level assistant in '95.
Okay.
and started mixing in '96.
Okay.
And since then,
You've never stopped, have you now?
never stopped.
He mixes now in his own Red Studio in Paris, or with Malaco in London.
Yeah.
And Red Studio is the name, is program. It is very red. Is that your favorite color then? Is
Yes.
that your choice? Very good. And he's mixed with just an amazing amount of, mainly I would say, funky people, funky, dancey,
Let's
poppy people.
call it like that. Yeah.
Yes, very good. Martin Solveig, Wycliffe Jean, CeeLo Green, a variety of French and Swiss hip hop acts, and even Madonna. Which album of hers did you do?
MDNA.
Wonderful. So
Striking.
you see, I'll keep as much question time as I can at the end of this, so you can ask these wonderful people your specific question. But I'd like to really get into the actually, maybe I'll start from the rear end, if you will. You've been all in the business for a very long time, meaning you still know the business as a time where there were severe time constraints on the time you could spend in a studio, because most people didn't have the cash to rent studio time open-ended, or didn't have their own place, meaning you worked in very close contact with artists. Now, when you mix, for example, at least in my world, there are so many projects where I have very, very direct contact with artists. If I meet them at all, certain mixing projects I get tracks for, I may have phone calls, I write emails and receive them. There is some whipping and some lauding, but it's very, very little. How do you deal with that? How important to you personally is the input of an artist? How important is it to shape what you're going to do with your craft? I'm going to start with Mick real quick.
Okay. First of all, on most mixes I get, the artist or producer gives me a rough mix, and I usually ask, or they let me know if I should follow something, if I should follow that basic vibe of it, or and just improve it a little bit, or whether I sort of try to get an idea of how much input they want me to put in it as a mixer. So with
Through
that,
the rough mix, or through the rough mix, you get that idea.
Through the rough mix. Sometimes I don't get a rough mix, and it's just sort of go ahead, and the communication comes later after I send in my first pass. But when I do have the rough and I have a discussion, whether it be email or on the phone, about what they're looking for, what they like about the rough, what they don't like about the rough, and I can incorporate that into the mix, then it's usually farther along when I send them the first pass. And then after sending the first pass to the mix, there's communications. Well, we'd like this, but we'd like this changed. Or sometimes like, oh, I like where this is going, but we should change this part. So they'll send me a track to drop in. So there is communication back and forth, usually quite a bit, but it's not real time. It's sending a mix, getting it listened to, hearing it back. And that was a little hard to get used to, rather than being in the studio and having it.
Do you miss it though?
Do I miss being in the studio?
No. Do you miss having somebody behind you going, eh? Or do you
yes and no. It depends on the person. There were some people
Okay.
who I really enjoyed having in the studio for the whole process, because they knew, their input was how could I say it? That the way they gave input wasn't disruptive to my process, but helpful. A lot of other times they wouldn't shut up, and or else a whole bunch of people sitting in the back of the control room talking, and I'd get up to 120 dB to give them the hint to get out.
That's what 10 kilohertz were made for, I think. Peter, how about you?
Yeah, no, I think it's working in the. I mean, a lot of the work I do is actually still in the control room with the artist there, and I think it's great. You definitely tend to up your game a bit when you know that you're being scrutinized, and I think you get to the point much quicker. When I'm mixing at home, it's kind of, well, I can boot Pro Tools up with my dressing gown on, and then go and have a cup of coffee, and then it's kind of a more relaxed process. Whereas when you're in the studio, you can you know where you are, you know where you're headed a lot quicker. And I think both ways work. It can also be great to be relaxed at home, but I think what Mick was saying about it's after you've presented that first mix, what happens then when you're on email communication. It can get a bit tricky, you know, people say, oh, can you do a vocal up mix for me, please? And a vocal up is like, well
how much?
How much? You know, is it 1 dB? Is it 3? You know, my thing is usually, if you're not hearing the vocal, it could be because something else is in the way. So is it okay if I re-EQ something in the mix, or can I shuffle things around? And then it's like, well, I don't want to change that because they might say, you know, you've changed something, and it was, you know, so I think it's a bit of both, you know, I think.
That's the interesting thing, though, and maybe I can go on to Philipp with this, because I guess the difference I experience is that my communication with the artist, as you both described it so far, is when I mix in today's situation, meaning at home or in some type of in any location not frequented by the artist, the input that I get from the artist is much further along in the project. So is the danger bigger that you run into the wrong direction because you don't get feedback earlier, or do you seek out feedback?
No, and I think I would say it's the modern way of working, having less social time with the artist. I take it like that, because not being in the room with me personally make me more efficient. No noise, nothing in my head. I just go. And as Mick said, I'm really relying on the rough mix to get the first idea. When I hear the rough mix, I suddenly have the idea of the final mix immediately. I know where I want to go, and I propose that. And you're right, the key point is this first preview one I'm sending. And there, everything starts for me. As soon as I send that, everything starts. Can be good, but I think if people are in the room, I don't make a better mix. I would say even probably a worse mix.
But you do.
I agree. Second guessing. Think, what is this guy thinking? You know, and a lot of times I'll end up second guessing whether the artist or producer even is thinking that. Yeah. It's.
Do you feel that as well when you're tracking? Do you feel like, it'd be nice if they wouldn't tell me, if there wouldn't be any? Obviously they're there because they're playing, but
yeah.
But it would be nicer if they would just let me get my sounds.
They usually did. Well, I haven't been doing that much tracking. I just don't get called for it that much anymore. But never. Tracking was. I think that would probably happen more with self-contained bands, but most of the tracking I did was with studio players. So it was very easy. They were always happy. They played so well. Their instruments sounded so well that I couldn't fuck it up. So
I must say, just on that before I forget it, I did a mix for a reggae artist, probably one of the only reggae artists I worked with, and the first 2 hours of the session, we worked on the bass drum, which is what you imagine, and in those 3 hours. He asked me to put more bass on the bass drum, more middle on the bass drum, and more treble on the bass drum.
Yeah. Yes.
And in the end, he said, "You know what? Just turn it up."
I took a mix once. I won't say who the artist was, for mastering, and brought it back to the artist. He goes, "I think it needs a little more lows, and I think it needs a little more highs, but the mids is pretty cool. But while you add it, why don't you add a little more mids?"
Right. Yeah. The old saying, please increase the bass at all frequencies.
Yeah, that's it.
Yes.
Boost at all frequencies.
But actually, Peter, it's I'd like to hone in on you a little bit, because since you do produce, you don't get around communicating with artists as much as the mixing people do.
Right.
Meaning, you can't really shape the environment as much. And what you just described with the kick drum is a really good example as well. How is there a way to translate technical knowledge and technical necessities to the artists as you're trying to inspire them. I guess I personally feel like one of the worst things you can do in a creative process is to say, just hold on, I got to do this and that and the other thing, or the Flagomagator doesn't work anymore, so we have to take a lunch break, whatever, or you need to do this and this, so it sounds better. I guess that would already be communication, but like just turn down your amp because. How do you communicate? How do you develop a language with an artist? And you've worked with the reggae artist and Ute Lemper.
Yeah, with Ute it was mainly just a vocal, obviously a vocal recording we did for Scott's, one of Scott's. No, hang on, it was Ute's album, and Scott had written 2 songs for it. So it was kind of, I didn't have a lot of time before or after, so it was more of an engineering thing, just making sure the headphones were right, making sure she felt comfortable in the studio, which is one of the main things. If you set everything up well, if they're hearing everything right, and the communication between the control room and the recording room is flowing, and then it can avoid lots of problems.
Do you help that by? Do you put people next to you? Do you prefer that rather than having them in a different room?
No, mostly they're in a separate room. But I'm talking about like sometimes you can press the talkback mic on a mixer and it clicks every time you press it, and throughout the course of a day, every time you speak to the artist, you're going to be winding them up, because every time you talk to them, there's a before it, So those kind of things can be really important, and sometimes I have my own talkback mic to get around that, but it's really just building up a lot of trust in the artist, making sure they understand where you're going, the suggestions you're making, that you're not trying to take them off into a completely different zone, and kind of being a leader, but also being willing to be shown the way.
So you're making their record, not yours? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's not a lot of room for ego. I think I leave that to the artist, and that's great. You want them to have a good, they've got to go and stand behind their music and their art once we've finished. And it's give and take. At the same time, you can't really be a producer if you don't have an opinion and kind of show the way. But there's ways of doing it.
That's just my question to Philippe actually as well. It's very true.
What Peter says is exactly why I don't do it. Because
why what?
The exact reason I don't do tracking and production, that's the exact reason, is just because it's so much effort. You give so much energy to make everything flow the right way. And I always found it's a lot of energy. I'm not saying mixing is easier, but a little bit on that side.
It's more solitaire, I guess, yeah. But there's a question for you, because, one of the developments, I would say, of the last, started in the early 80s, probably with Bob Clearmountain and people like that, but that mixing isn't just the end of a process, of a production, but it's somewhat of a branding of the project. So mixing engineers have much more become, I would say, adding their own, people who add their own spice to somebody else's vision rather than organizing it as it may have been before. Do you have problems? Is that something you need to communicate, or are people that approach you only approaching you because of your brand? Or your specific sound, your Philipp Weiss-ness?
They only approach me because of I should maybe not say my sound, but me, to get the results they want. They are never trying or don't know if they're gonna get it. No, I should say it's 100%.
Okay, well, that's an interesting thing. So do you ever have that situation that Mick described where you have, even though they approached you as a brand, as putting that in the end, you know, it happens so often. It's like, I'd like to have a producer, but I want him to do whatever that, you know, I want them to do what I want to do, only more successful, but I don't want them to have their own opinion, their own spice in there. So when you add your own spice, even though they booked you for it, are there situations where they say, I want it to be more like my rough mix, and how do you...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How do you
Absolutely.
And how do you negotiate your way out of that, through that? What is your approach?
I absolutely negotiate everything. I will talk about every aspect of it. And for me, the first goal is the artist to be happy. The artist is going to sell the record. The artist is going to represent the record. I don't. I am here to serve them the right way.
And if you get to an impasse, like for example, we all have, so don't pretend you haven't.
But I do.
So where like, you know, you feel like what they want, even though you will do it in the end, if they insist, is a really bad idea. How do you communicate that? How do you give alternatives? Do you communicate with sounds, meaning you send them different versions? Is there a way to communicate why you think how it is? That it's not a contradiction of their vision, but rather an improvement of it?
I won't do any diplomacy. I would just say, I don't like it. It's not a good idea, but I will do it. Like that, you can listen to both versions and make a choice, and it's your choice.
So you do two versions. I do that too. Like,
Yeah, I do two versions.
yeah.
Because I think they are my clients. They want to work with me, and I feel I need to give them what they want.
I guess, yeah.
You know,
That's
it's a
great
service.
approach.
And then give them an example of
Absolutely.
what you feel would work better. And if they agree, fine. If they don't, and they're happy with the other direction, or they want you to go, explore the original direction more, go ahead and do that. But if I do have an idea, I try to at least present it.
And how do you do that, Mick? That's exactly what I'm trying to show these people. There's this quote by Bowie saying, one of my favorite quotes, talking about music is like dancing architecture. So how do you make an alternative version and say, check this out before you make a decision, or do you communicate it with, let's say, examples of other people, or do you verbally communicate? How do you do it?
Well, it usually happens when I feel that a mix, that there could be a different perspective or a different effect or different placement in the mix than they originally wanted and it's in the rough. And sometimes I'll talk about it, either talk on the phone or with email and suggest it. And usually I just end up suggesting it and saying, I'll make another version like that. I might not take it to where I feel it should be 100% final, but at least so you can hear that direction and decide whether you want me to go that way or how we were originally going.
What's your success rate, you think? I mean, do people come around generally and say, okay, well, I never thought about that way, but I'll do it? Or is it 50-50, or can't you?
I'd say 50-50.
Okay.
It's it's a matter of, see, how can I put it? I'm thinking of one of the mixes I did for Janelle Monáe recently, is that there was a section of the song that was a little more guitar-oriented, a little more rock-oriented than the rest of the song. And it was sort of linear, the way it was originally. And she didn't really say anything, but the head of the record company goes, "Can you make that a little more rock, a little more guitar there?" So I took it like so far in that direction just for those sections of the song. And, they go, that's not where we are, and by the end, the mix ended up as a compromise and ended up really cool.
Well, does it ever happen that, and this is for you two again, like in the course of a mix, you send, for example, your idea, they're open to it, and they realize something needs to be changed in the arrangement, and they say, hold on, we need another week to figure this out, we'll send you an update?
Yes.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
Yes.
Happens a lot?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's the beauty of working in the box.
Yeah.
It's so easy to change and to do recalls.
Redoing the vocal or redoing a bass or whatever. Yes.
Let's take that rock example. Say, okay, we'll do the whole thing rock, or we'll just take that down and replace it with guitars.
Yeah. Well, it was more the guitars were there.
No, I'm just wondering. It's just an example. I'm just saying that would be a perfect example of saying, wow, this is much better as a rock song. Maybe we should go back to the shop and send them something.
But I think as far as a mix engineer, the question behind what you say is the ego. Are we putting our ego first, or I don't?
Yeah,
I mean, I just
as a mixer, you can.
I think
That's why, as a mixer, I think your ideas have to be suggestions more than, hey, I want to do it like this. And I find that artists and producers are usually very open to suggestions, and will listen and will respond honestly.
Well, I think one of the reasons for that is because I think by the time an artist and a producer actually gets to the mix stage, they've almost had enough of it. So they're coming to you guys and they're going, listen, we've been working on this thing for 4 months.
Yes.
We need you to sort it out. I mean, not my own productions, obviously, but generally it's like they're looking for a mixer or remixer to actually put their stamp on it. And it can be
the process.
Yeah, it can be interesting because you can let go of your recording, your track, have somebody else mix it, and suddenly you go, hang on a minute, those guitars are a lot louder. That's actually what I wanted in the first place, but you didn't. They somehow the decisions have been kind of resolved by going to somebody who hasn't been involved in the original recording.
Yeah.
So.
But that's what I mean, by the way. It's not about how do I get my ego through, but like, I feel as though all of us who work who help artists, if you will, have a kind of an advisory role. And what I'd like to find out is more or less how you use especially, all three of you have a very significant standing. And I'm sure you have that because you can communicate what your knowledge, your input to these people. So the interesting thing is how you do it. That's just to clarify where I'm going with this, because I think we all agree that pushing your vision on the artist is never a good idea, because that's why you're where you are and they do what you do, and the combination is what makes everybody better. Yes, absolutely. I have a question for you, Peter, real quick. I think part of it is of what we do, kind of adding on to what I just said, is to facilitate the process of being creative, meaning you bring kind of method to the madness.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Which is a huge form of communication. How do you, if you would work with somebody new, and let's say they're the less organized type. There are, of course, the Zen types that get up at 7, start making music, go home at 6, have this in the middle, and it works just fine. You could work with the flow. But with a lot of people, they get anxious because they don't know, should I continue on this? You should do this. And creating a method usually helps. How do you do that? How do you suggest ways to live creatively to people?
I think from the original idea or the spark of an idea, you're trying to identify the parts of a song that are really, the core of the song, and you're building a structure around it. And I think sometimes the early stages of a production, it's good to recognize those things, point it out to the artist, and actually show them the value in it, which they might not actually have recognized themselves. So, and then building the song around that. So it could be, they wrote the song on a guitar, and just thinking, okay, this might sound better on a piano. Let's just try a piano version, and see what happens. I think it's a question of opening doors, and closing the ones that you think, okay, this is definitely not going somewhere. You don't even go into that room, but maybe you'll find a way into the song that you can then go and explore. And it could be in a number of ways. It could be the arrangement, it could be a slight change to the lyric, it could be instrumentation, it could be a feel thing, development of a melody. There's so many ways you can actually get into opening a conversation with the artist. And I think in a way, once again, there's a lot of sort of honesty, and you can sort of see where you don't go straight away. I think, So, yeah, it's like almost working as a filter and just filtering out the stuff which is maybe not needed. You know?
Right. I have two questions before I give the audience their say. One, do you need more water?
Sure.
Everybody want? Okay. Can I have 3 more waters?
Vodka for me.
Okay. and the last one, which is kind of, you don't have to name names, but what was the most challenging artistic communication you ever had to survive?
It's not there yet.
It's not there yet?
No.
You haven't had one yet?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
But
Well, not ever, but so far. Oh,
very hard
shuffling
to
of
answer.
seats.
Yeah.
Ah, great, thank you.
Gibt's das den beiden?
Challenging.
Thanks.
I've got one.
Okay, Peter, you
I
lead
mean,
the field.
Communication in
Yes.
in itself, the definition of the word. I was recording a band called the Modernist City Ramblers in Italy, and we had the Italian language going. There was a gypsy band from Macedonia passing through, and they wanted to overdub a whole kind of gypsy band, and they didn't speak anything but Macedonian, I guess. Don't know what they speak there, and they had a translator with them who spoke French, and I ended up, I think, speaking in German to the translator. She understood a bit of German, and she then translated it into Macedonian, into French, because she didn't speak Macedonian. They understood it, and then they came back. It was just chaos. There's like 4 languages going on at the same time, you know. And at the end of it, I had the Italian band going, "What was that?" And in the end, we realized that we couldn't actually change anything, and it was just like roll the tape and record it and sort it out later, you know.
Mick, do you have an anecdote for us? If you don't want to, it's fine.
No, it's cool, but it's more of a general thing that's happened. Doesn't happen that often, but a lot of times a record will be done, the artist is happy, the producer's happy, the record company will want a little different perspective, and to do a remix on it, not a remix of changing the arrangement, but just a mix with a little different perspective, and the artist and the producers pretty much had it with it and won't communicate because they don't, you know. So I'm trying to listen to what the A&R department of the record company is saying, and it's not what the artist wants a lot of times. I'm sort of just caught in the middle of making a mix that satisfies nobody, basically.
Do you have that problem as well? You know, these people work with really famous people, which in turn are responsible for a large part of the Christmas business of a record company. So the more money is generated, the more people have an opinion. And of course, you two, being the final link in the production process, are the ones who have to carry the brunt of it, bear the brunt of it.
Or the New York.
Is that something you suffer from, Philip? Or is there?
Not really.
No.
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. Okay, I'm gonna open the stage. Wenn ihr Fragen habt und kein Englisch kann, übersetze ich gerne. Ja? Kein Problem. Who wants to ask a question? You guys are kidding me. The healthy man in the back. There we go.
Thank you all. Very inspiring talk. To Monsieur Weiss, do you have like no communication with the artist before mixing?
yes, I do. I receive the rough mix. I try to talk to them prior mixing. But I really rely on the rough mix. That's really the thing I'm always asking for. Then I'm always having a discussion of where they want to go, what is the goal, what they want to do. Voilà, always.
Is there, since you all have hits in the big sense of the word, do a lot of people come to you and say, I want you to mix it like this song you've mixed before?
Yes, they do.
Does that piss you
Yeah,
off?
in the electronic world, they do.
Okay.
In the electronic music especially. Yeah, I want to sound like that, I want to sound like that, yeah.
Okay. Mick,
My side.
do you have more freedom than that?
Usually, sometimes that happens if somebody's really into a record that I've worked on before, and you're wanting it to sound like that. And sometimes it'll work, and sometimes I don't feel the record was. I don't feel, or else I don't hear where the record was originally made to sound like that, and to try to force it into a direction that it isn't sometimes causes problems. But that doesn't happen too often, really.
Okay. Yeah, I've had the experience when I came here. It's like, oh, you worked for Prince. Can you mix a punk record? And you're like, huh, okay, I don't know how that belongs together, but the fairy dust that we all carry, apparently. Any more questions coming up?
Hi, I'm on the other side of the communication usually because I'm a singer, and I just wanted to ask you, what do you wish for? Because if I communicate with my producer, sometimes I lack vocabulary in technical terms or whatever. Is there something you generally wish for in communication from the artist?
I think probably engagement and sort of a two-way conversation, being open, and it always feels uncomfortable to me when it's me doing all the talking and can you do it like this and do it like that. It's always nice to hear someone go, yeah, I'll give that a try. I quite like that idea, or actually I'd prefer not to do it like that. I did it like that on another record, it never worked out. It's a two-way conversation. It's not, and that's part of the thing of listening to, usually by the time you get into the studio, you've got that sort of good sort of relationship going where people can, it's about giving feedback to suggestions. Yeah.
And for me, as a mixer, and since I'm usually not face-to-face with the artist, I like it when I talk to the artist for him or her to describe as well to me as the kind of sound, the kind of placement the vocal should have in the mix. And it's very helpful sometimes to have examples of other records that they feel well like that. Because sometimes when you're mixing something, you can achieve the same vibe or same effect as the example that you like, but done in a different way because it interacts with the track you're working with differently than the example. So it's sort of a matter of being able to translate what people say to you into audio terms.
And for me, I would say not to be too technical, not to be too accurate, but give me image, direction, colors, whatever, going through the singer head or whatever the band. Just give me like something, and I will try to make it happen, but not too. I don't like when it's too technical.
Yeah,
that
right.
should be like that. That should be like.
Yeah,
Stress me a little bit.
Some artists know technically, and
I know.
And if they, and if somebody knows that vocabulary, it's great.
Yeah.
But it's more often than not, I need to hear about the feelings of it, and then I have to try to translate that into a technical language.
I've been in the studio with Twigs recently. I don't know if you know Twigs, and she doesn't want to know anything about the technology and stuff. She just says, that's above my pay grade. I don't want to know about all this stuff. So you keep that away from them, and you find a language you can make.
And if I can chime in, I think it's really wise if you just know, if you pretend to know technical lingo, we will know, and it won't help us any. I've gotten instructions of like specific compression ratios that didn't exist to whatever settings, and knowing that doesn't work. And I would put you on the spot if I would do that, meaning you wouldn't hear anything. So what I'm saying is communicate how you can communicate. Use examples. It doesn't have to be, by the way, Mick was mentioning other songs you like. It doesn't have to be songs that was mixed by the art, but like if you say I really like the vocal sound on Yesterday by the Beatles, that means something to all of us. So that's a good way to communicate. Any more questions? You have 3 of the most famous rock and roll people of the world right there. Ask questions. Otherwise, I'll continue. Okay, there you go.
Well, see how good we were. We told them everything. They don't have to ask anything.
I had another thing with Scott Walker. The first few times we worked together in the studio, and he kept saying, "I want more echo on the voice." And I was like, "Wow, he wants echo on the voice." So I was doing like some delay stuff and everything, and suddenly realized that he was like, "No, that's not it, man. That's not right." You know. Suddenly realized that he wanted echo chamber. So he wanted reverb, not echo. So you've got to get your language definitions.
And most of the guys who are even older than I am in this business did call reverb echo. Yeah, so you get an artist that worked with a lot of these original guys. They ask for echo, and you sort of have to know the whole area that they came from.
How did they call echo then? I mean, how did they call delays? Delays?
Well,
repeats.
I would say repeats or
okay.
Slap. Yeah, slap. But I never, from then on, I never corrected him. So whenever he said echo, I just put more reverb on, you know. And the assistants are like, that's not echo.
So if you have like feedback of the artist and you're running into like situation the artist is telling like strange compression ratios or like even a little bit of uncomfortable talking, how can you give some comments of how to socially handle that moments, like not confronting or affront the artist?
Very difficult question.
That's why Hans Martin says he never sleeps, you know. Producer never sleeps, because you actually usually take it home with you and work out a solution. I don't know, Mick.
That's one of the benefits of working at home. You just go, oh shit, you don't like it. and you're not showing it in front of somebody in the studio.
I mean, I've seen people sort of say, listen, just give me half an hour on this idea. Let me show you what I mean. I'm not saying that this is what we're going to do, but let me just show you what I'm thinking of. And then, you know, be prepared. Maybe if it's not the right way, then, like I say, you kind of close that door. Maybe open it up later. But I think the idea is to keep moving forward and not get stuck on one particular thing, you know.
Very important to move forward, always.
Yeah.
Always push it forward. Always.
I think the question is really, really good, because one thing you never want to do is put an artist on the spot.
Yeah.
I know producers who do that, who reign by fear, and it works just as well, actually, but only once.
Yeah, it's true.
So I personally would answer that. For example, if somebody comes across and comes up with some weird, like, mumbo jumbo lingo they picked up somewhere, I don't say that's mumbo jumbo lingo you picked up somewhere, you stupid dud. But I say, oh, you mean like the bass on, you know, if I know them well enough, the bass on Getting Better by the Beatles, to stick to the band.
Yeah.
And then they go, yes. And then I know how to do it. And then I ask for the 15 minutes to get it that way. Yeah. But I think it's really important, like all these three gentlemen said.
Know how to go. Yeah, know how to go like this.
Yeah. And to not
always.
You have to realize, and a lot of people, especially beginners, I don't think realize this. If everything works out, the artist has to live with the result of what you're doing today for the rest of their lives. You're going to do something different tomorrow. You know, if it's well, you can sit on panels like this and say, oh, I've done that, great. But it's over. Whereas they have to live with it, they have to be happy with it, and you're in the privileged position to help them with it. So I think we have time for one more question if you have it.
Hello, gentlemen. It's really inspiring to listen to you guys. What do you guys? What's the advice you can give if you're ever in a tight spot and it comes to that point where time is running out, the budget may be running out, and you may not be where you're supposed to be schedule-wise? And do you guys ever get into the situation of doubting yourself and just because like factors like time and resources are limited, and there's just this deadline rushing at you, and you're not there where you need to be? Does that ever happen to you? And what is a word of advice that you could give when when the days are getting really long and your ears can only take so much in one day?
Drugs.
Yes, it happens, obviously. Not since probably 10 or 15 years, it didn't happen. But at the beginning, yes, it did.
And now working at home, and most mixers do work in a private studio, that constraint doesn't exist as much because you're not, the artist isn't on the line for studio time. And if you need more time, you can take more time. You've already made the business deal, so it's I'll just leave it for the night and hit it fresh the next day.
And I should say when the business side is done and closed, and then we have the time now. You work at home. I mean, I work at home. Half a day won't change nothing, I think, most of the time. And it's a little bit not an old school question, but I don't really run into that situation because I have the luxury to have the studio at home, and that's one of the reasons not to be stressed and not to be pushed against the wall.
Yeah.
Because I don't accept to be pushed.
Yeah. No. And when you start feeling self-doubt, which I don't know, I mean, I do a lot of times, but then I stop, and then the next day it becomes clear.
You just look at all the Grammys on the wall.
I think a good part of that question is, of course, your general time management, I guess, is part of the deal. When you're in a beginning situation, of course, you take every job that swims your way, and sometimes you feel like you're overstretched. It's the usual feast or famine situation where there's nothing for 2 months, and then you have to do three records at once. How do you?
That still happens.
Yeah, but is there advice on time management? I mean, if you're in a situation like yourself, do you have a? Yeah, go ahead, Philipp.
After 6 o'clock at night, my ears are closed. I don't hear nothing anymore. But I start at 8 in the morning. Can you check this, Philipp? Yes, sorry, again. No, what I mean is my ears are closed at 6 p.m. I don't hear nothing anymore. But I start at 8 in the morning, and I manage my time really, really well. But after 6, I don't. And usually, I should say, I mix between 4 and 5 hours a day. No more than 3 days a week. Otherwise, I'm not as fast if I do too much.
How much? Oops, sorry about that. How much? Hey, it's me. It's me, the guy. How much do you get done though in those 3 days? I mean, do you do a mix a day, or is there?
I do a mix a day, but no more than 3 mixes a week. And it takes me, I should say, 4 hours to get the thing, and then 4 or 5 hours for the detail and stuff like that. But I don't do that anymore in one day. Sometimes I take even 3 days to do one song. I do 3 hours a day or 2 hours a day.
Do you flip between songs? So, for example, when
Yes,
you
I do. Yes,
okay.
I do. And between project and between song.
Is that good or bad?
It's good.
That's a beautiful ending. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time and your insight. And they're going to be around for the next 2 days, so feel free to accost them wherever you can. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.